Yesterday morning, or at lunch yesterday, you heard our opening keynote speaker, Professor John Boyer from Virginia Tech, who utilizes technology to create learning communities in 3,000 person face-to-face classes. And then we went to the other end of the extreme, and you were a part of a deliberative democracy, deliberative dialogue event where you were creating communities of 10. Well, we're going to take you back to the other end of the extreme, and we're going to talk now about large virtual learning communities. It is my pleasure to present to you Dr. Andrew Ng. He is a professor at Stanford and also is one of the co-founders of Coursera. For those of you that have been following, you've no doubt seen a lot about Coursera and several other organizations such as Udacity and edX in the news as they begin to look at MOOCs, those massive open online courses, and finding ways to bring education to yet another large community. And so we are very pleased to have Dr. Ng with us this morning. He's also going to be speaking this afternoon at the Governing Board Conference. We're going to try to set aside about 10 minutes for Q&A, but we also want to make sure that we get folks out in time to go next door for the Star Awards luncheon and the State of Higher Education address. So it is my pleasure to present to you Dr. Andrew Ng.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm a Stanford professor and co-founder of Coursera. Most people today will never get to take a Stanford class, but we're changing that. Working with such universities as Princeton, Caltech, Columbia, Penn, Stanford, and others, we're taking courses from these top universities and putting them online, free for anyone to take. We're using technology to offer high-quality education at scale. As a Stanford professor, I normally teach a 400-student class. Last year, when I put my machine learning class online, it reached an audience of 100,000 students. To put that number in context, in order for me to reach a comparable size audience, I would otherwise have had to teach my normal Stanford class for 250 years. Who are the students? It was students like Akash, coming from a middle-class family in India, would never have had access to a Stanford course if we didn't put it online for free. And students like Jenny, single mom, 39-year-old with 2 college kids, who again could not have shown up at Stanford every Tuesday and Thursday to take my class otherwise. Since we launched this project about a year ago, with working with our partner universities, we've now set up a broad curriculum of courses spanning the humanities, the social sciences, the basic sciences, finance. Let me show you some of our classes.
Make us better think. And if we run this, we get unbelievable segregation.
So Bush imagined that in the future, you'd wear a camera right in the center of your head. A love poem is a poem about another person.
Mills wants the student of sociology to develop the quality. A hanging cable takes on the form of a hyperbolic cosine.
For each pixel in the image, set the red to 0. So let's see what that looks like.
And that vaccine allowed us to eliminate poliovirus.
Does Lufthansa serve breakfast in San Jose? Well, that sounds funny.
So this is which coin you pick, and this is the key possible.
0 from being passive, so passive becomes a best response.
So in large-scale machine learning, we'd like to come up with computational uniqueness. So to report to you our progress so far, with 33 universities, what that allows us to do is be a hub of innovation, where we and our partners are together inventing the best practices in MOOC, massive open online courses, pedagogy, and rapidly sharing these innovations with each other. With nearly 200 courses and 1.5 million students, we're also currently by far the largest MOOC or massive open online courses platform. We actually reached 1 million users faster than Facebook, and in the last 2 months, we grew another 50%. I should say that I don't think it's because we're anyone special. The rapid rise really speaks more, I think, to a societal need for inexpensive, high-quality education, as well as, I think, the strength of our university partners and their ability to meet that need. So why do so many students sign up to take our courses? I think first and foremost, it is that they are real courses. The course starts on a certain date, and it runs for a fixed span of time, 10 weeks in the case of my Stanford class. And this is a serious class with weekly lectures and weekly homeworks. This was a plot of the web traffic as my class progressed last year over time. And those peaks, those heartbeats on this figure correspond to when there was a homework deadline. Every time there's a homework deadline, predictably, it's the 24 hours before that the web traffic spikes, which I think proves that procrastination is a global phenomenon. And when a student completes a class and meets our relatively high grading bar, they also receive from us a certificate or similar that they can put in their resume and use to find a better job. So our courses have three main components, the first of which is video-based instruction. This is what our lectures look like.
In the game, and generally we'll
and
start
just to point out, accelerated video playback,
starting point,
and
then we have to decide what are their strategies. So what are the possible actions that each player can take?
Which is useful for less fluent speakers of English.
Of a distinction in order to really
as well
capture
as crowdsource foreign
details of
language
what's going on in the
captioning.
predator-prey relationship. Well, probably not.
We found that when we put courses online, many students prefer to use accelerated playback. The student actually sped the video up to 1.5x speed. When I teach in a normal Stanford classroom, I find that I have to slow things down and just blab and make space for the students to think. Because in a technical class, especially if you lose a student halfway, they may be lost for the entire lecture. And there's different students that need different amounts of time at different points of the lecture. In an online site, we find that many of our students prefer to blast through the material, and if you miss something, you just do an instant replay, and this is much more efficient use of the student's time. And of course, I mentioned also the English captioning helps the less fluent speakers of English to follow our content as well. And the reason we chose video-based instruction is it turns out to be easy to create. This was a picture of me taken, recording my machine learning lecture where I write on a tablet and everything I write on the tablet is captured, and so is a webcam when I choose to turn and have my image recorded. I had an interesting experience about a month ago when I finally met some of my students that were taking this class. It turns out that I was shooting a lot of these videos, in a small office at 2 a.m. And when I met my students and told them this, they told me that there was the mirror side of that, where there are a lot of my students that were also then watching my videos at 2 a.m. One of the things that we encourage our instructors to do is, instead of posting hour-long videos of instructors droning on, to take long lectures and break them down into, say, 10-minute chunks and to post short videos instead. This allows instructors to create content with optional prerequisite and/or optional advanced material, and also allows students to navigate through the content in their own order and at their own pace, moving us away from the one-size-fits-all model of education. But the class is much more than just lectures, and homeworks and assessments are also a key component. When we as instructors talk about assessments, we often think about evaluating student performance or assessing student performance. But I think the far more important purpose of homeworks and assessments is not evaluating the performance, it's often where the learning actually takes place. We know that students learn best not by passively listening, but by having opportunities to practice with the material. Many pedagogical studies show this. This is one of my favorite studies that appeared in Science last year, where if a student studies, they achieve a certain level of performance. If they study multiple times, the second bar, they do a bit better. But it's really retrieval practice. It's really the process of being tested on the material. That's what causes the neural pathways to be formed that correspond to long-term retention. Because of this, we give our students many opportunities to practice with the material. And one example is that even in the lectures, we make that interactive with what we call in-video quizzes. Let me show an example of that.
These four things: prospect theory, hyperbolic discounting, status quo bias, base rate bias, they're all well documented. So they're all well documented deviations from rational behavior.
And when the video reached that yellow notch, the professor felt like asking the student a question. So the video pauses, the question pops up, student enters an answer. They didn't get it right the first time, and so they get to try again. And they can see an optional explanation before the class moves on. And I want to contrast this with my experience, and I suspect the experience of many of you as well, teaching large lecture classes. In my Stanford class, when I ask a question of my class, usually half the class is still madly scribbling away, trying to write down the last thing I said. And about 10% of my class is typically zoned out on Facebook. And then there's always, when I ask the question, there's always that one smarty pants sitting in the first row that just blurts out the answer. And I, as an instructor, feel great that someone answered my question, and then the class moves on. And so only one student, or at most a small handful of students, got to engage with the question. In contrast, on a website can ironically be much more interactive than a large lecture class. The video pauses, every student gets to attempt a question, every student gets instant feedback on whether or not they're mastering the material. Beyond the in-video quizzes, all of our courses also have often weekly exercises, and this goes well beyond the standard multiple choice. We have support for short answer questions, for math expressions, so we know that x plus y is the same as y plus x, and even more esoteric examples. There are often many equivalent ways of writing the same mathematical expression, and our software understands all of the different variations, so students can do math problems and actually express the answer however they want, and we can grade that. Going even further than that, we didn't just want students to be able to, I think math is such a key subject for all of us. We didn't just want students to be able to do a math problem and submit the final answer. We also wanted students to be able to show us their work, show us their derivation. And so this is work with Alex Aiken at Stanford, but working with Alex, we're developing software to do automated grading of mathematical derivations, where we have students write out a proof, and every single step of a mathematical proof that we ask them to do, a mathematical derivation, is checked by our software. So in this example, we were asking them to take the mathematical derivative, the calculus of a mathematical expression, and the software makes sure that every single step in the derivation is justified. Even for Stanford students, I find that this is useful to avoid, I guess I've graded math homeworks for many years, and I kept on getting these solutions from students which would have one line of math, one line of math, one line of math, and then this magical and therefore step, followed by magically the correct answer, and the software actually steers students away from that. So a couple more examples. We also can grade structured data. We call it structured output. So if you're running a finance class or a biology class where you ask the students to do some sort of mathematical modeling, a biological process, a physical process, a financial spreadsheet, we can grade that too. And of course, we can also auto-grade computer programs for computer science classes. Let me just show you one example of computer programs and of how interactive this sort of experience can be for the students. Here the student is asked to do a programming exercise where they are asked to implement a color correction piece of software. The student is writing the code in the upper left. When they hit run, they see the answer. They don't quite have it right yet. Statue of Liberty is still looking a bit green. So the student modifies it, reruns it, and gets the answer correct. And all that happens right in the web browser. And you watch a video for a few minutes, go play with the code for a few minutes, watch a video for a few minutes, go play with the code for a few minutes. And that's the student experience with these sorts of interactive exercises. One of the things that having a website allows us to do is allow us to engage in what's called mastery-based learning. In today's classes, when a student submits a homework, what happens is, we usually take a week to grade it, and then when we return the homework to the student like 7 days or 10 days later, chances are students forgotten what they did like a week or two ago. And if a student got 60 out of 100 on a homework, I mean, what can you do, right? The class moves on. And the reason for that is, I think, using human graders, using teaching assistants, we have the resources only to let the student attempt the work once. But on a website, we can allow a student to attempt the same piece of work over and over until they get it right. I think someone once said, this is something that I think is very profound. In our education system today, what is held constant is the amount of time you spend learning a piece of material, 10 weeks or however long it is. And what is variable is how much you understand. I think it should be the other way around, where what is held constant is that every student should succeed, and what is variable, what can be variable, is how much time a student has to spend on a piece of work before they succeed. So what we've done is invest a lot of work into creating randomized homeworks that allows students to engage in what's called mastery learning, in which students are encouraged to come back over and over and reattempt the same piece of work over and over until they get it right. Now, you don't want students to do exactly the same homework. You want them to do, randomized or slightly different variations of the homework, a bit like the DMV written exam, if you have children that have done that recently, right? If you don't pass the DMV written exam, you go back the next day and you get to try over and over until you get it right. And so we've invested substantially in tools to enable instructors to create these sorts of mastery learning exercises. Just show you one example. In this example, the instructor is creating a homework about the Second World War, where the instructor gives 4 true statements written in green and 4 false statements about the Second World War. Whenever the student comes to our website, the website will then randomly pick 2 correct options and 2 incorrect options, and the student's asked, check all that applies. If the student doesn't get this right, if they come back a few hours later, if they restudy and come back, we then show them a different randomly chosen set of correct and incorrect answers, and yet another correct and incorrect set of answers. So it becomes difficult for the student to memorize the answers from one round to the next, but this turns out to be one of several easy ways for instructors to create huge question banks, problems with many, many variations without too much effort. So far, we've been talking about auto-graded exercises. That has the advantage of giving feedback to the student within 1 second. When the student submits a piece of work, we take about 1 second to grade it and turn it around. But not everything can be auto-graded. And in order to offer more open-ended courses, like teach a poetry class or humanities class or social science class, or a class where you have students write business plans, we also invested heavily in developing a framework for peer grading. Small-scale pedagogical studies like this have shown that peer grading, having other students grade your work, results in highly accurate grades. And if you set up the incentives right, then self-grades, where students grade their own work, are also highly accurate, and further, they're pedagogically useful. What we did was take these ideas of peer grading, which had previously done in only smallish classrooms of, say, 50 students, and combine that with the idea in computer science called crowdsourcing, so that we can build out peer grading frameworks for tens of thousands of students instead of only 50 students. Your experience in a peer graded class would be the following. You'd be assigned a piece of work and you would be asked to do the piece of work. Say, write a 300-word essay describing critiquing some piece of poetry, or writing a business plan, like a 300-word essay. You would then be trained to grade other students' work, and you'd be asked to demonstrate proficiency at assigning grades. We'll ask you to show that you can assign grades on a small set of homeworks that the instructor has also graded, and demonstrate that you can assign grades similar to what the instructor did. And finally, you would then be asked to grade, say, 5 other students' work, and in exchange, you would get feedback from 5 other students about your own work. So this sort of peer grading framework has been key to enabling us to offer more open-ended exercises. Here's an example of a screenshot of a peer grading framework where the students were asked to do a design exercise. So we actually had students take a piece of paper, draw out a design, take a picture of their cell phone, upload the picture of their design to the website, and every student graded 5 other students' designs and got feedback from 5 other students about their design in turn. Because of the peer grading technology, we've been able to offer a broad range of courses in a broad range of disciplines, spanning, I've mentioned, the humanities, the social sciences, the basic sciences, engineering, business, finance, law, and other areas. I think university education is very broad, and we're committed to developing the technology to offer as broad a range of courses as possible. So I've talked about the video-based lectures, we've talked about the homeworks. The third and final major component of our courses is the sense of community that arises around the courses. Here's the map of these students taking the Princeton sociology class. It turns out to be much easier to develop a community when you have 100,000 students in the class rather than only 100 students in the class. When you have this many students in the class, it means also that no matter what time of day you are awake thinking about some problem, there will be someone in some time zone awake and thinking about the same thing as you are that can talk about it with you. We invested substantially in developing an online question and answer forum that scales to 100,000 students. And what you notice here is that answers to questions are posted by other students. Questions and answers by students actually get voted up and down by other students, so that the most helpful questions, the most helpful answers rapidly bubble up to the top of the list. This is a little bit like if you shop on Amazon, this is a little bit like the Amazon, is this review helpful or not? Last year, because we had so many students in the class, when a student posted a question, the median response time to a student's question was 22 minutes, right, with the response being written by another student. And this 22-minute response time, is a far better level of service than I was ever able to offer my Stanford students. More recently, we've been experimenting with something called community TAs as well, where we invite students that had done well in one version of the class and come back to be TAs or teaching assistants for the next offering of the class. And our volunteer community TAs have been very enthusiastic, and this starts to create a community that spans multiple offerings of the class as well, where you have trained up experts from the previous offering to help support the students in the next offering of the class. Beyond the online communities, we've been finding that physical communities have been springing up organically as well. We have meetups in over 1,000 cities now, and this is a picture that we took recently when we visited the San Francisco Human-Computer Interfaces class study groups, and students all around the world are coming together in small groups to support each other and to learn the online course, to take these online courses together. My professional background is in machine learning, statistics and machine learning. And one of the things that having these online courses allows us to do is analyze student learning at a detail and magnitude that was never before possible. In a typical education study, if you have a new theory on education, if you run an experiment, you might have an experiment group of 20 students and a control group of 20 students. If it's a large study, maybe you have an experiment group of 200 students and control group of 200 students. On our website, when we want to run an experiment, we have experimental group of 20,000 students and a control group of 20,000 students. And moreover, it's not just that we get the final grade at the end. On the website, we log every mouse click, we log every homework submission, every forum view, every forum post. We know where every single student fast-forwarded part of a video, where they rewound and did an instant replay. We know how many students did this, at what time of day. We log every homework submission, be they correct or incorrect. We know how many attempts every student needed to make on different versions of randomized questions in order to get it right. And this detail and this scale and detail of data is unprecedented, and I think has never before been available to education. And I would love to do to education what companies like Google and Amazon and Netflix have done to e-commerce. And I personally think that education is a far more worthy cause than e-commerce. So let me share with you a couple examples of things we did. This is the work of John Huang, who's a Stanford postdoc. Let's say a student is doing a programming exercise, this is in my class, and let's say they have an incorrect submission, later on they have another incorrect submission, and later on they finally get it right. What we would like to know is what happened between the final incorrect submission and when they finally got it right. So what did the student do in order to correct this misconception? What we did was we looked at forum visits, the discussion forum visits of the student during this period of time. And what we did was use a calculation to identify the forum discussion thread that was most likely to cause a student to correct the misconception. Okay, so in information theory, there's a notion known as mutual information, but we calculate the mutual information to try to identify the forum discussion thread that increases the probability of the student correcting their misconception the most. And for this example, we actually did this in my class. We found one particular forum discussion thread that increased the student probability of getting it right by 30%. This is the single most helpful forum thread. And when I, the instructor, went back and read what this forum discussion post was, I found that this particular discussion thread gave a very pithy answer that was correcting a misconception that many students had. It was a definition of a particular matrix that was a bit unclear. And in fact, this was then useful information to me to go back and clarify that homework to correct this misconception. One other example. Funny thing happened to me last year. In my machine learning class, for one of my homeworks, 2,000 students submitted exactly the same wrong answer. This had never happened to me before. In a Stanford class, if 2 students out of 100 students submit the same wrong answer, probably won't even notice, right? But when 2,000 students out of 100,000 students submit the same wrong answer, that's a very strong signal to the instructor that some clarification or something should be changed. What we did, I guess each little cross on this figure is a solution submitted by a student. The students had to submit a pair of numbers. And shown on the upper left, that huge red cross, that was a cluster of 2,000 identical, nearly identical, incorrect submissions. This is a programming exercise that students were asked to do. And because we were able to identify that there was a common misconception, we were able to go in and look at the student submissions. What was the students getting wrong? In a small sample of about 15 of these 2,000 answers that we looked at, we found that students had a common misconception where they were reversing 2 steps of a mathematical algorithm. And so we were then able to go back and generate a custom error message so that when the 2001 student submitted the same wrong answer, we were able to generate a custom error message that says, oh, why don't you consider the order in which these 2 steps of the algorithm should be done. And this then helped the students get over the misconception much more quickly as well. Some of you may have heard of a seminal study in education called the 2 sigma problem by Benjamin Bloom. He showed the following result, that if you deliver content to students via a standard lecture, then student performance will follow, like a bell-shaped curve. And that means that 50% of all students, shown in blue versus black, will perform above some median level of performance. In a study, and it's actually a huge meta-study, he showed that if you can use mastery learning, this idea of letting students try the same content over and over and move on only when you've mastered the previous piece of material to build on, by using mastery-based learning, you can shift student performance by 1 standard deviation or 1 sigma. What that means is that now 86% of your students are now performing above what was the previous median level of performance. And if you can go even further to individualized tutoring, then student performance increases 2 standard deviations or 2 sigma. And what that means is that 98% of your students are now performing above what was previously the median level of performance. So, won't it be nice if 98% of our students were above average? And the reason Benjamin Bloom called this the 2 sigma problem is because we as a society simply cannot afford to give every single student a personalized tutor. But with online education, I think we could certainly get to mastery learning, the 1st sigma, and with some of the personalization things that ironically is enabled by having the massive data that tells us when 2,000 students make the same mistake. But with the level of personalization that we can build in when we have the detailed data that tells us what to do, I'm hoping that we can start to push out from 1 out to 2 sigma as well. Finally, to wrap up, over the last year or so, I've been talking to a lot of people about education, and I was often asked if anyone can go online and take Princeton classes for free, why on earth would anyone still pay for a Princeton degree? If here was maybe Mark Twain's answer. And so perhaps he didn't think college was worth the price of admission, but I don't agree. And going even further back than Mark Twain, here's a quote from Plutarch, who says that the mind is not a vessel that needs filling, but wood that needs igniting. I think the real value of a university education is not just the content. Content is increasingly free, available on the web anyway. Instead, I think the real value of a university education is the interactions with professors and interactions with other equally bright students. So many of our partner universities are now using the online content to use what's called the flipped classroom, in which by taking the lectures and putting them in video format, what you can do is ask the students to watch the online videos the week before class. And ironically, the online videos, we said, are often more interactive than a large lecture class. But what this does is that once a student has watched the lectures the week before, they can now come into the classroom for discussions, for small group discussions, or for small group problem solving. And this is creating more time in the classroom for the interactions, for the professor-student and the student-student interactions, which I think is the real value of attending a top university. In fact, I've heard from, I guess, quite a few university presidents and provosts that they had been wanting to move instruction to this more interactive mode of engagement for many years now. And I guess as supported by pedagogical studies, which shows that these more interactive modes of engagement improve student performance, not by 1 or 2%, but by like 30%, right, on almost every single dimension. But the problem with trying to have students interact with professors previously was that if the registrar schedules you only for 3 hours in the classroom, well, you have to use those 3 hours to lecture at your students, because if you have only 3 hours, I mean, you have to give them the content. How else are they going to learn what they need to learn to do the homeworks and go on to other courses? I'm told that the lecture was invented about 400 years ago, when the modern university lecture was invented about 400 years ago, when there was only one copy of the book. And the lecture was invented as a way for the instructor to broadcast the book to their audience. And instructors literally, flip open the book and you just read from the book. That was the lecture. But surely we have better ways to deliver content to our students now. And so using the flipped classroom, what our instructors can do is look at an instructor dashboard the night before to do just-in-time teaching, for example, so that you can see what homeworks your students got wrong on our website and focus the discussion on what the students are actually confused about rather than just talk about everything. In my flipped classroom, I spend most of it asking my students to do small group problem solving. So the student experience is that you come into the classroom and the instructor would assign problems based on the lecture you watched on the website, and you then get to work on problems with your friends and discuss problems with your friends and have the instructor stop in from group to group. And I think it is these sorts of interactions which I think is the real value of a top university education, and by having these online content, we're creating much more space for this. In closing, over the last year, been traveling a lot of states in the US, also a little bit internationally, talking about education to people. One thing that surprised me is that even today, a lot of people say that a high quality education is only for the elite. A lot of people say that a high quality education is only for the privileged. I say that a high quality education is a fundamental human right, and with technology, we're working to bring it to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got about 10 minutes for question and answers, if there's any questions. Just give me some time to get back to you. Maybe you can meet me halfway.
course and getting a better job. So to what extent is the labor market taking notice of this phenomenon? And to what extent is this an efficient and effective signal to the labor market to be better?
Let's see, it is happening already. Anecdotally, many students are using our courses to find better jobs. If you actually go to LinkedIn.com and search for ML class, ML-class, you find literally thousands of students listing my machine learning class on their resume. So students certainly perceive that this will help them to find a better job. And anecdotally, I have heard from many employers that they take this seriously. We've actually had a lot of employers approach us unsolicited, asking to hire our top students. This actually goes all over the gamut. There are high school students putting this in their resumes to try to show college readiness, because what better way to prove to an admissions officer that you're ready for college than by showing that you've already completed a few college-like classes at top universities. In Silicon Valley, where I live, we have skill gaps in particular areas, and it turns out that a single class can actually significantly raise someone's salary by opening up to them jobs that were not previously available to them. One thing we're doing at Coursera is building out a job placement service as well, where we take top students from our classes and try to, with their permission, try to introduce them to employers to help them find better jobs.
Do you anticipate that Stanford will ever give actual credit for these courses?
Right. So let's see. Most of our partner universities are not planning to give academic credit for their own local institution for these courses, but there are a few interesting things that are happening. So for the foreseeable future, Stanford will not be giving Stanford academic credit for free online courses. But there have been other universities that are starting to give academic credit for our courses. And so, for example, University of Helsinki, a few in the US too, but more abroad, I think, told their students to go to Coursera website and to take our classes, and they asked the students to bring back our certificate to them and maybe do a bit of extra work, like write an essay and a few other things. And then the University of Helsinki has been giving academic credit to students taking our classes. We had nothing to do with this, but I think this is a great development to help students get college credit as well. One other interesting model that a few universities are experimenting with is using our content in this flipped classroom mode. So at Vanderbilt, for example, it's Professor Doug Fisher, who asked his students to watch my videos, and this saved him the content preparation time. And then his students would go into the classroom for discussions with him. And I think that was, and again, I see a few universities starting, a few community colleges experimenting with this as well. And I think it could be a great way. I think all of us are working on the problem of the cost of higher ed. I think the $10,000 degree is a great vision. When I look at some of the things that technology can offer, I think a $10,000 college degree used to be a big, scary goal, but if you look at the things you could do with the flipped classroom, a $10,000 goal actually could be not that difficult to get to, I think.
Last year at American Council on Education, they visited with us the Khan Academy. How is this different from the Khan Academy? Can you kind of give me an idea on that? Explain the Khan Academy for those that may not know what that is also.
Oh, sure. So actually, I'm friends with Sal. And Sal Khan Academy is great. So Sal Khan has created content focusing on the K through 12. Most of the content is created by him, but he happens to be a great teacher. And so I think the main difference between Khan Academy and Coursera is K-12 versus higher ed. So if you want to, if you have children and they want a refresher on like intro math, the lower grades of K through 12, I think Sal Khan is great for that. It turns out we had to choose different strategies because the K through 12 curriculum is relatively narrow, so it's possible for one amazing teacher, Sal, to teach most of it himself. Higher education is very broad, and I don't think there's any one person, that can teach computer science, chemistry, biology, medicine, law, finance, the humanities. There's no one human can do all that. And so we've been more focused on creating tools for the great universities of our country and great universities of our world to be the ones to create this content.
I think we've got time for one more question.
I have a question about the students who don't succeed rather than the ones who get through. I mean, I can sort of see incredible ways in which this technology and this approach solves certain pedagogical or improves certain pedagogical approaches that we have been traditionally using. But one of the things that I think we all struggle with all the time is actually motivation. Mm-hmm. Motivation to come to class, motivation to do the work, and in your system, right, to do it over and over and over again until you get it right, which obviously works better than just giving up or just doing it once and finding out you got it wrong and then moving on to the next thing. So I'm wondering whether you have ideas about how the technology plays a role in that. I mean, I have a view that people also, and real face-to-face community also plays a role in that, but I wonder if you could talk about that in terms of how do you get the students, 100,000 of them, never mind, to actually do the work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So let's see. We're working on it. Right now, retention is an issue, right? Many students drop out of our classes without completing, and it is one of our high priorities to figure out better technologies. We have a few ideas. You know, with an online website, we're working on things like gamification to give students, to encourage students along and motivate them. We're thinking a lot about social learning. I think students learn best not by studying in isolation, but by having not just a discussion forum, which is what I show, but other ways to engage with other students. So we're trying to build things like that. I think there are two populations of students we're trying to serve. One is the hundreds of thousands of students out there. Recently, a student wrote, to them, the choice is not between, the choice for them right now is either this sort of online education or no education. So I think we're vastly improving their experience, but we still have a long ways to go. We're working hard on retention, social learning, and support. And then the second population is the on-campus students, where you can provide this sort of very valuable, in my opinion, professor-student mentoring. I'll share with you a statistic. At Stanford, most of our classes are recorded and televised. They videotape us and put the videos on the web. So in a typical Stanford class, the in-class attendance drops to 10, 20, 30% by the end of the year because most students would rather just watch us on videotape. When Daphne really pioneered the flipped classroom in a university setting on Stanford campus. When Daphne ran her class using a flipped classroom mode, even though the in-class interactions were optional, none of the content was required for the finals or midterms or homework, and even though it was also recorded so students could watch it at home, her in-class attendance went up from 30% to 70, 80%, which is totally unheard of for these pre-recorded Stanford courses if attendance is optional. And I think the reason that happened is because there was now more value. It's actually interactive. And I think drawing students into our classrooms this way is a way to make sure students get that human engagement that I hope will help with retention.